Welcome to our first presentation on the orientation materials. I apologize there. So here we are on Canvas. I'm going to scroll down to the orientation module. You can see it's immediately below Chapter 4 and immediately above Chapter 5. The things that I'm going to be sharing with you today are primarily things that you have access to in this folder. I'm going to be going over the PowerPoint is kind of the main thing I'm going to do today, or at least in this particular lecture. So this is where you'll find a version of the PowerPoint. You may want to pull it up as we talk together about this. I'm not going to go through each one of these slides. Many of them you may want to spend a little bit more time with when you're on your own. You obviously know who I am. This is my email, cgruber@collin.edu. This telephone number is obviously completely useless at this point, so the email is the way to reach me. If you have questions about course selection or things along those lines, you are welcome to email me. If you also have Professor Wagoner as an instructor, you may want to email him if you have more of a connection with him. Or we also have an associate dean. It's probably better to contact Professor Wagoner or me before you go to the dean, just because she's not as much of an expert in the ins and outs of our program. So any of us would be glad to help, though. We're here to provide that resource for you so you can navigate through the course selections. I'm going to provide some access to some study information. One of the things that in my experience is so important in the paralegal program is to develop a disciplined approach to studying. Many of you already have that, which is awesome. Many of y'all are working on developing it, which is awesome. I recommend a set time every day where you study. The time might vary from day to day, but on Tuesdays I always study from, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. or whatever the particular schedule is. A good rule of thumb is for every hour you're in class to spend 2 to 3 hours outside of class preparing. So if the class is a 3-hour class, for example, like ours is, you ought to be looking at spending 6 to 9 hours in addition to the 3 hours in class. So that's kind of a good idea. If you're spending more than that and you're not seeing the results that you want, you may want to touch base with me, and I'll be glad to give you some suggestions about maybe how to streamline your approach. If you're not spending that much time but want to see your grades improve, it's really just an equation of time in, time out. This course, it doesn't really contain difficult material. It's just a matter of spending the time. Unfortunately, it takes time. For some of us, it takes a lot of time. For others of us, it might not take so much. But it really is an equation of how much time you want to spend. That's really going to dictate where your grades end up in the course. I like to say that I'm not the grader, I'm just the recorder of your efforts. There really is pretty much of a direct connection between the amount of time you spend and the grade that you're going to get. And having said that, I'm not saying everyone needs to aspire to an A by no means. It may be that this particular semester is one where other priorities are going to be first and foremost in your thoughts, and that's a very reasonable approach under those circumstances. So when you read the chapter the first time, my suggestion is just read it. Just do ordinary garden variety reading. It's the second time that I encourage you to really go through and outline it, diagram it, really take it apart and put it back together. And then maybe the third time you read it, that's a more of a lighthearted reading. As long as you eventually get to the point that you've outlined it, that you know all the content in that chapter, it's okay. The order of when you read it, skim it when you read it more deeply, that can vary depending upon your schedule and your preferences. Just keep in mind that virtually every answer to every test question is going to be found in the chapter. And so that's really your roadmap to success in the course. Please don't sit down to take a quiz until you've outlined that chapter and you really, really know it. There's not any paragraph in it that you haven't thought about and considered before you've taken that quiz or that test. So here's just some suggestions about how to approach it. Reading is kind of an interesting thing. You might think about reading as being an active endeavor, but those obviously we're all adults. We all know how to read. It becomes kind of an automatic pilot type thing. It's entirely possible for a person to read a chapter and not retain any knowledge. Um, so you have to stop yourself and force yourself to say, I just read that paragraph. Now I'm going to mentally tell myself what I learned. And if I say to myself, I don't know, then I need to read it again. So force yourself to be an active learner, outlining it, going back and quizzing yourself about each section, each chapter. I'm sorry, each section, each paragraph, the chapter. A good approach is to find a sympathetic person and teach them what was in the chapter. You'll have your notes, and so you can go through and if you aren't able to explain what's in the chapter clearly enough, it probably means that perhaps there are gaps in your knowledge. And so you can talk to a human being about that, or you may just choose to talk to yourself to see what you've really grasped and what you haven't. Um, Marking on textbooks is a controversial thing. If you're renting it, obviously you can't. If you're hoping to resell it, that was going to diminish its market value. Sometimes people will put Post-its in the book and write on the Post-its. Um, if you, though, find that marking the textbooks is a useful endeavor, I think it can make a lot of sense to do so. To have a color coding system, to write in the margins to get the full value out of that textbook. One of the things, if you're like me, when you do textbooks, you will be tempted to over highlight. There are a couple of suggestions I have. The first suggestion is don't use the commercially prepared highlighters for several reasons. The biggest one is they're way too expensive. Number one. Number two, many times they will bleed through paper. And a third problem is that you can't undo the highlighting. I like to use just general crayons to highlight. That way I have an infinite number of colors, and I can highlight darker or lighter as the text goes in. It's so much cheaper, and I don't have to worry about keeping a cap on it. I find that a much more useful way to highlight than to use the commercially prepared ones. But of course, that's your decision. But I suggest that before you highlight anything, that you've read that chapter carefully at least once. Because what happens, at least for me, is the first time I read a fact, I highlight it that first time. And then I see that fact 2 pages later and I highlight it again because that description is more precise or I think more on point. If you've read the whole chapter, then you're thinking, that's where I'll highlight that fact. So you don't end up highlighting the same fact multiple times. So it's a good idea to wait on highlighting until the second or the third read through the paragraph of the chapter. There's lots of wonderful tools out there that are electronic. Quizlet is the one that I think is very, very popular these days, and I encourage you to use it. I'm not going to go through Quizlet here. I will in a subsequent presentation. But Quizlet understands the science of how we move things from short-term memory to long-term memory. And they have some really cool tools that will kind of take you by the hand and lead you through that learning process. So if you are uncertain about how to approach learning, I think Quizlet is such a wonderful product because it will make key decisions for you. You still have to spend the time, but you're not going to have that feeling of, am I doing this right? Quizlet knows how to do it, and it's going to show you how to do it right. Whether you spend the time or not is your decision, but if you spend the time with Quizlet, you're going to get to that end point of success. But if you don't want to use Quizlet, which by the way is free and you should never pay for it, there's lots of other tools out there, both electronic and then the good old-fashioned paper flashcards. And by the way, one of the neat things about Quizlet is you can use it wherever you are. Most of us aren't leaving home a lot right now, but back when life returns to normal, you can use Quizlet when you're waiting at your kid's soccer practice or you're in line at the grocery store. You can take those 5-minute little bursts of energy and use that to learn material. Most of us have probably a couple of hours of time that we spend during the day waiting for things, or I'm not actively doing something. And if we use that time for learning, we may find that we're able to accomplish more academically. If you find things that you don't understand, please come to me. Come to my office hours. Come to one of my Q&A sessions. Email me the question. Or if maybe that's too intimidating, hopefully it's not, but if it is, talk with a classmate about the material. Um, so that's a piece of advice. We're not going to have face-to-face classes, at least not for quite a while, but even on the online classes, you can be an active listener. Think about what the instructor is saying and thinking to yourself, do I understand it? How would I say it? If I were going to ask a question, what would my question be? How would I apply this to new circumstances? Always be asking yourself these questions. Don't just sit there and listen. Take the notes. Say, well, how would this apply if I change this one fact? It's very important to be an active listener. You can attend lectures, and just being present isn't going to cause that information to move from short-term memory to long-term memory. That's something that you have to do. The instructor can't do it for you. Take good notes. Many people have their own systems, and if your system works for you, awesome, wonderful, stay with it. But here are some suggestions if you don't have a system that works. One idea is to develop some kind of shorthand system. Um, Honestly, in class, I'm going to be given stuff so quickly, and your other instructors are going to give me stuff so quickly, you can't write everything down. But if you have a shorthand system, you can write down more stuff. I remember when I was in school that, the whole class would go by and I would be writing constantly. And even at the end of the class, I would think to myself, I missed so much that I didn't hear. Maybe that's your experience as well. Um, Having a shorthand system makes it easier. And that was one of my motivations to developing my own little, it's unofficial, but it's my own little shorthand system. It can be as simple as just dropping off vowels out of words, or it can be very complex with different symbols for different words and things like that. The study guides that I post, let me just flip over and show you these, can be a helpful way when you're watching the lectures. You can see here, let me just open up chapter 4 here. I have a study guide. Opening that up in Canvas and filling in the blanks online, or if you want to print it up in printed form, while you watch the lectures is a way to engage you in that process. Plus, you end up with a really nice study guide to study from at the end. I like to say that everyone's notes should reflect their own brain, and so no one's notes should be the same. I might put together, if I were a student in class, the best notes for me, but that doesn't mean they're going to be that helpful for you. And the most important part of the note-taking process isn't the time you spend reviewing your notes, although obviously you're going to do that, but the time you spend creating your notes. The time in class where you hear what the instructor is saying and then you put it on paper in your own words, that is such a huge and important part of that learning process. So I know there's a temptation when you're watching tape lectures to say, well, I can listen to this lecture, 7 times or whatever. I don't need to take notes. You don't have to. I mean, I'm not going to collect them, but if you aren't taking notes, you are not making the most use of your study time. Um, the amount of retention you'll have will dramatically increase simply by the action of writing down your notes. And then when you go back the second time and take your notes and polish them and organize them, that consolidation also is going to move lots more information from short-term memory to long-term memory. I'm going to just show you the Cornell system. As I said before, note-taking is a really individual thing, and everybody's brain works differently. And so you may look at this and say, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Or you may say, oh, that looks horrible. And if it looks horrible, then please disregard this. But there is some science behind using the Cornell system, and this is what it is. And you can see there's 3 zones. Over here, you put little cues or little hints so that you can find data and you can organize data. Most of your notes are going to be right here. Obviously, your notes are going to be quite a bit more involved than this. This is just designed to show you an example. And then you'll summarize everything on this page at the very bottom. And so there's kind of 3 fields. Again, if this system works for you, awesome. Or maybe parts of it works for you, but other parts don't make sense, well, adapt it for your particular learning style. Or disregard it completely if it doesn't make sense to you. Please network in the course. If you haven't made a study buddy or several study buddies, let me know and I'll be glad to post some kind of online meet and greet on Canvas so that you can find those folks. Just because we're not able to meet face-to-face doesn't mean that you can't have a study buddy. This is somebody who you can exchange notes with, talk through things, maybe share Quizlets with, things along those lines. It makes studying less awful, and it can sometimes be very meaningful in terms of developing a professional colleague. Much of this stuff isn't relevant since we're going to be taking tests online, but I will bring you to the bottom 2 choices. When you are reading a test, notice the important words, the hard to be true words, the easy to be true words, the negations. Obviously, you're not going to be able to write on the screen, but you can write your own notes so that you remember those words and you pay particular attention to them. Even in single answer and multiple choice questions, think of them as a series of true-false questions. And I recommend that you actually write down T and F to those questions. And if it's a single answer true-false, you should have 3 F's and 1 true, or 4 F's and 1 true. And if you don't, then you know, hey, wait a second, something's going on here. And so you'll want to spend a little bit more time figuring that out. Multiple choice problems are just true-false problems. That's all they are. There's just a lot of them. You just happen to know the ratio of true to false for that particular question. I've already shown you Cornell. This is more information about how to structure it. Again, you can Google it and get a lot more information too. So we're not going to do the request for a degree plan as a class. I usually hand these out and then I collect them and I submit them to the advising department. But you can do it on your own. Let me show you where you find it. I'm going to go to Collin. Oops, sorry. Request for degree plan. And you can see it's the very, so if you Google, well, put in the search engine, request for degree plan, you'll have it right here. You can print it out. It's a 2-sided document, but don't worry if you don't have a printer that prints 2-sided, that's fine. You'll just put your name up here. If you don't know your college-wide ID, I'd be happy to get it for you, but you don't have to include it. Your date of birth, your telephone number, your catalog year. Your catalog year will be 2020. If this is your first semester in the paralegal program. If you've taken a course in a previous semester, say last year, then it'd be 2019. But actually you can just list 2019, 2020. That's probably the better way of saying it. The reason that you're listing other colleges here is so if you have courses that will transfer from your previous college. So on this side, there's nothing to mark. You are going to flip to the other side. So other than filling out this top part. And you go over here, and this is our Associate of Applied Science and our certificate programs. So you see, if you are interested in Associate Applied Science and Paralegal Studies, then you will highlight this item or circle this item here. If you are a certificate student, then you will highlight this one right here. Those are the 2 credentials that we offer. We'll talk more in subsequent orientation sessions about which one of these credentials you ought to be pursuing currently. So I would suggest that you go ahead and print this up, or if you don't want to do it now since we're out of school, come see me when we all get back, or print this up at some later time and go ahead and submit it, or give it to me or Professor Wagner. Either one of us would be happy to submit it for you. So these are the two credentials, the Associate of Applied Science and then the certificate. All grades will be in your transcript, so if you fail a course, unfortunately, we can't make it go away, but you can retake courses. And if you get a D in a course, it will count as a passing grade at Collin. If you decide to transfer to a four-year school, in many cases, those grades won't transfer. And so you may want to consider retaking a course in which you got a D because of the lack of transferability, but probably more logically because obviously you didn't master the material. And this is the GPA that you need to not get on academic probation. We encourage students who don't already have a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree to get the AAS, but we also encourage you not to stop there. To become a paralegal, you don't need more than an associate's degree. That's a fine level of credential to be successful as a paralegal. But if you go and get the bachelor's degree, you will find that you earn more money, you will do more interesting things, and you'll have more job security. That doesn't mean that you have to get your bachelor's degree before you start working, and in fact, there's really no reason to wait to get your first job. As soon as you can, I would encourage you to do it even well before you get your associate's degree. But it can be a very meaningful credential for you to get that bachelor's degree in terms of your career trajectory. We have articulation agreements with several different schools in the area, UNT, Texas Women's University, um, Texas A&M at Commerce. Those are the three that are probably the most likely that students use to continue on their studies. And so if you have an interest in that, please reach out to me if you have any questions about that, or Professor Wagner. We have a co-op program. If you want an internship, this can be a great way to get your foot in the door in terms of a long-term job. This is actually wrong. I apologize. I should have updated this. This is not Larry Mon. Larry has retired. The new person is John Hines, who is awesome, super nice, really approachable, and very knowledgeable. He runs our co-op programs for lots of different programs, including the paralegal program. And John's email is just jhines@collin.edu. I'm not going to write out, but you know the rest of the email. Professor Wagner is usually the person who handles being the faculty liaison. If you already have a job in the legal area, then you can use that job for your internship. If you don't have a job yet, you can reach out to John Hines to get some ideas about where to find that type of position. It's a 3-credit elective course. You can start it at any point. It doesn't have to start at the beginning of the semester, although it does need to start, I think, at the beginning of the month. And in addition to doing the internship, which is at least 20 hours a week, you'll also need to attend some seminars and write a paper. If you have questions about it, again, John or Professor Wagner would be awesome resources for that. Or you can chat with me because I used to run the program many years ago, and I'd be happy to tell you what I know about it. Our final course in the program is the CLA exam review. CLA stands for Certified Legal Assistant. That's the test that the National Association of Legal Assistants, the national organization, offers for credentialing paralegals. It is the most well-known test. It is very, very prestigious to be able to pass that test. And our final course in the program, our capstone, is all about getting you the information so that you can pass the test. You don't have to take the test, but we recommend that you do. As you go through this course, you'll probably get a pretty good idea about whether you're likely to be successful in the test or not. Most students don't pass every section the first time they take it, but you can take the sections you failed again for a much lower price. So it's kind of like the CPA exam. You kind of take parts and complete those parts and then finish the whole exam over time. Um, if you complete our program, you are eligible to take the CLA exam. Ethics, in this course, we kind of look at ethics from two perspectives. One is legal ethics, which of course we have a whole module on, but of course then we also have academic ethics. We've talked about the unauthorized practice of law already. As a legal professional, it's important that you think about what you say because your friends and family members will see you as a legal expert. And so it's important to realize where the line is when you've gotten into the area of the unauthorized practice of law or not. It's a best practice not to give legal advice to family and friends for lots of reasons, one of which is this ethical issue. Another reason, of course, is that there can lots of hard feelings can happen if you do that, and it ends up in the person it doesn't work out for. Um, so, and they blame you is kind of the scenario. So I would discourage you from doing that. You can use this unauthorized practice of law concern as a basis for why you're not giving legal advice. That kind of gets you off the hook, and you can say, oh, I'm sorry, that's considered unethical for me to do that because I'm not a licensed attorney, but I can refer you to an attorney. That's a good approach. From a academic ethics standpoint, of course, we have our own, at Collin, our own ethics policies, and of course, we don't permit cheating. Um, it's amazing to me that people choose to go into the legal field and yet still sometimes do engage in cheating. If that's something that you find that you're tempted to do, this is not the profession for you. This is a profession about following rules. So please take that seriously. If you find that you're a rule bender and you're somebody who doesn't really like to follow the rules, this may not be the best fit for you. There may be lots of awesome other careers that are good fits for you, but having those high levels of ethics are really an essential part of being a legal professional. Are there legal professionals out there that don't have those? Absolutely. They're an embarrassment to the profession. I know that the vast, vast majority of our students are highly, highly ethical, and that's what we want. It's much more important to be an ethical legal professional than to be a brilliant legal professional or the legal professional who bills the most time. Your personal character is really your card in this profession, and so I trust that academic ethics won't be a problem for you going forward. So all of the instructors in our program, other than the instructor for our capstone, is a licensed attorney. That's this course right here. The instructor for this course is usually Cynthia Minchillo, who is an amazing paralegal. So we are attorneys, but we aren't your attorney. And I think it's really helpful to keep that line drawn. Um, I have had many students who've asked questions clearly designed to get at personal information. And what I will say is to that person, I am happy to give you a referral to an attorney, but I can't give you legal advice. And the reasons that I can't are manyfold. One is that because I'm a full-time instructor, I don't carry malpractice insurance. And so I would be being a really stupid attorney if I were to give you legal advice without the correct insurance. That's reason number one. Reason number two is I don't stay current in the law. And all the nuances of every single area of the law. Even my area, employment law, I haven't actively practiced in that area for 10 years. And so I don't know every single case that's come down the pike and every new law that's come down the pike. So it's entirely possible that I would give you bad legal advice. Number three, and this is the most important reason, is that the relationship that you have with your teacher should be different than the relationship you have with an attorney. And so we don't want to muddle that relationship or confuse that relationship. Having said that, I am glad to give you referrals, books I recommend maybe that you might look at, attorneys that might be available. I'm happy to do that. Just please don't ask us for legal advice. It puts us in a really awkward position, and the answer's got to be no. So um, let's avoid that question, I guess you could say. Thank you for your attention. I will have additional orientation presentations, so be on the look for those additional materials. Thanks for your attention. Have a wonderful day.